Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's case study on water. This case study is for the Lean Six Sigma course, and I think it's perhaps one of the most important, it covers one of the most important topics and issues of today. So without further ado, I'm going to start diving right into this water case study. All right, so let's start off by looking at the water crisis globally. Now, if we look at what's been happening with the world population, over the last 40 years, the world's population has actually doubled in size. And the need for water, therefore, has increased by 4 times. Now, by the year 2025, it is expected that the world population will go to 9 billion. And by the year 2050, it is expected that the world's population is going to go all the way up to 9.8 billion. And all of these people, it's important to remember that 2/3 of the world population will be living in cities. Now, this, as you can imagine, means a lot more people to feed. Their needs and the water requirements in the world are obviously going to be increasing because every human being needs about 12 gallons per day just to survive. So that's going to be needed in terms of water. And also in order to make food, there's a lot of water that's used in irrigation or in agriculture. And more what's very interesting is that one of the reasons that, there is a lot of water scarcity is actually because of the amount of water that is used in agriculture and also the amount of wastage that is happening in agriculture across the world. And so in addition to the increasing water requirements, what's also simultaneously happening is that the amount of water that human beings have across the world is also decreasing very rapidly because of pollution. And so there are a lot of industries, there's a lot of industrial waste that's just thrown in the water, sewage is thrown in the water, all kinds of toxins are thrown in the water. And so what's happening is the amount of drinkable water is going down and the requirement for water is going up. One thing to really, I just mentioned it just a couple minutes ago, but one thing to really, I want to emphasize is agriculture. And 70% of global freshwater withdrawals and up to 90% in some fast-growing companies. So much of water that is being withdrawing from the world is because of agriculture. And the sad part is that, about 50 to 80% of water that is used in agriculture actually just evaporates into the air. And so it's not even being used by crops. It's not being used efficiently and effectively. And so this is quite a big problem. Also, there is human beings nowadays, we have, despite the water shortage in the world, a lot of wastage is happening per person around the world. For example, in the United States, as I mentioned, it takes 12 gallons per day just to survive. But in America, an average American uses 158 gallons daily. So again, there's a lot more water that is being used than is actually required. And so here we can see, and since all of you are students of Lean Six Sigma, we can already start seeing a whole lot of waste, right? We're seeing waste, and as we know that there's 7 deadly wastes are extremely detrimental. And just in this short while, I've started discussing this case study, you can already see, that the requirement for water is increasing, but whatever water the world has, it's not being used efficiently, and there's a lot of wastage. Now, the world in the future is, a little bit more dangerous because by 2050, as I mentioned, the world population is going to go up to 9.8 billion. And that's a huge amount. And now if we look at 2040 and we start seeing, what's going to happen in terms of water requirements and the water supply in various countries, well, we see that it's a pretty bleak picture because anything in color is pretty much, a country that is going to be suffering with some level of water shortage. But there are going to be, various portions around the world that are going to be affected more than others. And, India and Pakistan, all that region, you can see it's in red. So that means there's going to be an extra high and extremely high amount of water shortage in this area as well. So this is a very real issue. I mean, this is all based on research, and this is something that will affect pretty much each and every one of us. So before I continue any further, I will now like to ask you to watch a couple of short videos. So I'm going to play those videos for us. And then once we are done with that, I will continue with the remaining lecture.
Water is the basis of life, and only a tiny share of all the water on Earth is fresh and renewed by the water cycle.
If you took all the water in the world and put it into a gallon jug, less than 1 teaspoon of it would be available to us.
We're overusing it. We're overtapping rivers, and we're overpumping groundwater.
We live at a time in history where over 1 billion people don't have access to safe drinking water, and over 3 billion people have no access to sanitation. Water is a global issue, but it's also a very local issue. We forget that we live on a hydrosphere and that all of our water resources are connected. Water that runs in the Ganges could also end up in the Hudson, or could fall over the plains of Africa, or could make a cup of tea in the Queen's Palace.
To support the average American lifestyle today takes about twice the global average.
The Great American Lawn is a great example of one of the myriad of ways that we take water for granted. We can't continue to flaunt our water.
Agriculture is something that we really need to give thought to.
70% of all the water we extract from rivers, lakes, and aquifers goes to irrigated agriculture. To some extent, we're using some of tomorrow's water to meet today's food demands.
Large number of people I talk to, when they learn that the Colorado, the mighty force of nature, no longer reaches the sea, there's a look of shock in most people's faces. At the Delta, it literally runs dry.
We are using and abusing our water resources in ways that are completely unsustainable. And unless we think about it that way, and we start taking action at an individual level, then I don't really see how we'll be able to overcome so many of the issues that we're going to be faced with in the next 50 years. And this is our time in history to do something about it.
So next I want to talk to you a little bit about Pakistan's water crisis. Now, if we look at Pakistan, 70% of Pakistan's water is being used for agriculture. And the country is very close to reaching a very dangerous level in terms of water scarcity. According to several reports, it is expected that the country will run dry or there will be a severe water shortage by the year 2025. Also, it is very important to remember that about 35 to 40% of the water that is being used for irrigation in Pakistan is wasted water. The reason is that outdated farming techniques such as the flood irrigation system is being used in Pakistan. And there is actually no pressure on farmers to really change the irrigation system to a more efficient system of drip irrigation. Just to give you a quick idea, and I'm not going to go into the details and show you all of these videos, but I do want to explain to you the difference between flood irrigation and drip irrigation. So in flood irrigation, basically what happens is water is kind of dumped in a big amount on a kind of a hill kind of situation, and it sort of goes downwards, and it eventually goes down to it throughout the fields, and it irrigates all the crops. But what happens is that, and this is, by the way, a very old way of doing irrigation, right from the Egyptian time, like really, really long ago. The flood irrigation has been being used, but in the recent past, a new system of irrigation has been, is being used and has been found to be a lot more efficient and effective, and it really saves, wastage from happening. And in the drip irrigation system, what happens is that small pipes are put throughout the fields, and just enough water is, these irrigation system pipes are opened, and just the right amount of water is given to the crops. And so there is no wastage. You know for a fact that all the crops are getting water, and you can manage the amount of water that is being given to the crops. And also there is no wastage. So there is not, it's not as if 35 to 40% of the water is just evaporating, which is what happens in the flood irrigation system. So right here, we're seeing that, 40% of the water of the 70% in all of Pakistan, there is a quick and easy solution to solve the problem, switch from flood irrigation to drip irrigation. However, in order to do this, it will be important to give farmers training and also to explain the benefits and help them switch over to the drip irrigation system. Mind you, the drip irrigation system is not very expensive. So very important to mention that. In general, in our farming, there is a low productivity because we do not, in our farming, we are not using good policies, and there is bad management. So our output, if we compare it to, per acre, the output of, let's say, a country, America, we look at California, where there are a lot of farms. Well, our output is just 1/3 of that, of what is grown in California. So really a lot more emphasis needs to be given to good farming practices, and really, these will help really increase the amount of crops that are their production, per acre, and also it will reduce the amount of water wastage. In Pakistan, the situation, as I mentioned, is about to reach an extreme shortage. This is something that is extremely alarming, and we really are not hearing enough of it in the news. We really are not seeing what is any preparations for how we will deal with this crisis as a country. On the positive front, however, we do see that there are some new dams that are being built. They are being expedited. These dams had not been were not being built. They had been put on a standstill for several decades. And finally now those dams are being built, and those dams in certain situations may be big lifesavers for the country in the future. But you know, these kind of sites in these photographs that you can see are not rare. You know, you do see people standing in line to get water. If you go, I went, let's say, you know, to the Badin and Thar area in Sindh, which is a little bit outside of Karachi. And, you know, these kind of sites of land sort of just cracked up because of a shortage of water were quite prevalent. And this is very, very alarming. So right now, if we really look at what is happening in Pakistan in terms of the water crisis, we're also seeing, you know, climate change impact our crops. And, you know, because of the climate change, you know, whenever, for example, rains were expected, well, it's not raining at the exact same time now. There are sudden changes, and this climate change is definitely not just impacting Pakistan. This is global. However, we do see it in Pakistan as well. Again, we in Pakistan to date have had a very reactive approach, and we have not really been working to fix the you know, water shortage issue. We haven't been expediting it, thank goodness. Now it seems with the current government that dams are being built, but I still feel that a lot more needs to be done in terms of good farming practices and really helping with that. In terms of water distribution, what happens on farms is a Vara Bandi system is used. And according to this, it's basically a rotational method. So if let's say a farm is, you know, there are 4 or 5 farm owners, let's say there's a huge piece of land, about 4 or 5 farm owners, well, they amongst themselves will determine a rotational kind of a schedule. So let's say on Monday, you know, one of the farmers will get water. The next day, Tuesday, the next farmer will get water for his land, and so on and so forth. So this is, you know, there is a mechanism that is used for water distribution in farms in general. And in some cases, there is a centralized agency that sort of manages and makes sure that everybody is complying to the schedule. But however, in some cases, it is decentralized and sort of there's nobody controlling and making sure everybody is following the system, but everybody just automatically does. So there's a little bit of difference, but net, this Vara Bandi system of, you know, having equitable distribution and a rotational method for water distribution is very prevalent. One other thing that is happening a lot in Pakistan, it's also happening a lot in India, is arsenic poisoning of wells. And so a lot of water, especially in villages and less developed parts of the country, is taken out of wells. But the problem is that now those wells have been poisoned because of industrial pollution, and you know, that seeps into the ground, and it basically really destroys the water in wells as well. So not only is it the water that is on the surface, but also the water deep in the soil that is also slowly being corroded and is not going to be available for use in the future. So what should be done to really expedite and solve all of these problems? Well, a lot of training needs to be given to farmers. They may need to be given some loans so that they can switch over to the drip irrigation system. Also, farmers need to be taught the latest technology so that they can really increase their efficiencies and productivity overall while using less inputs. Next, I'm going to talk to you about something very interesting. Since there is a water shortage and there is a great deal of scarcity, and it's known to all world leaders that this is going to be something that is going to be continuing in the future. Water is being weaponized and being used as a weapon. And it is expected, that in the future, a lot of wars will be primarily for water. So as we know, the wars nowadays have been on oil, and there are also certain wars being fought over data, because that is considered the new oil. But simultaneously, it is also said, according to a lot of security specialists, that in the future, a lot of wars will happen because of the scarcity of water. Before I start talking to you in more detail about the whole Pakistan-India water war, I would like you to see a video. So please bear with me.
Tensions are rising in India and Pakistan over Kashmir. Both countries have threatened to take action if violence there escalates, and one threat to a shared natural resource could have detrimental effects. For more than 60 years, India and Pakistan have been fighting over Kashmir, a contested region that's claimed by both countries. Despite ongoing efforts to create peace, 2016 saw violent protests and multiple attacks over the region, one of which killed at least 19 Indian soldiers. In retaliation, India's Prime Minister has explored the possibility of manipulating Kashmir's water flow to benefit India over Pakistan, conceivably prompting a war over this increasingly scarce resource. So how likely is this? Are India and Pakistan on the brink of an all-out water war? Well, India and Pakistan's conflict over water stems back to their origins as independent states. In 1947, India and Pakistan gained independence from Britain, and the two new countries were left to figure out how to divide up the region's natural resources. One of these was the Indus Basin, which includes rivers that flow from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, carrying water through both India and Pakistan. After partition ended and borders were drawn, the sources of most of these rivers ended up in India, leading Pakistan to feel as though its livelihood was in the hands of its enemy. In 1960, after years of negotiations and stalemates, the two countries signed the Indus Waters Treaty. India received control of the basin's 3 eastern rivers, and Pakistan got control of the 3 western rivers. But Pakistan's rivers flow through India first, so the treaty allowed India to use Pakistan's rivers for things like hydroelectric power and irrigation, as long as they didn't obstruct a significant amount of water flow to Pakistan. Over the next 56 years, India and Pakistan fought 3 wars and countless conflicts, but the treaty was honored by both sides, making it what many have called one of the greatest feats of water diplomacy in history. That is, until now. In response to rising tensions over Kashmir and a deadly attack on its military base, India has threatened to test the limits of the Indus Waters Treaty. In September 2016, India's Prime Minister said that blood and water cannot flow simultaneously, and that India will exploit as much of Pakistan's water as it can. More specifically, India reportedly has plans to expedite construction on a number of dams in Pakistan-controlled rivers. Although this is technically within the boundaries of the treaty, it would decrease Pakistan's share of water to levels not seen in decades, which could be detrimental as global warming makes water increasingly scarce. But India's projects are still in their early stages, so it would take years for Pakistan to feel the effects of its neighbor's retaliation. Nevertheless, expediting these initiatives sends a clear message that whether or not weapons are drawn, India and Pakistan are ostensibly at war. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Creating a website with Squarespace is simple. There's no coding required. You get a custom domain for free if you sign up for a year on squarespace.com. And if you enter offer code SEEKERDAILY at checkout, you'll get 10% off. Squarespace, set your website apart. The Kashmir conflict is complex and confusing, so we broke it down to make it easier to understand. You can learn more about the origins of the dispute by watching the video on your left. And if you want a brief explanation of why tensions are rising, check out our video on the right. Thanks for watching Seeker Daily. Please make sure to like and subscribe to see new videos every day.
So I think the video that you just saw gave you a great primer on what the whole India-Pakistan water war is all about. And just to give you an idea, this region and our neighbors, India, have been facing acute water shortages. So in April 2016, India actually saw a drought. And because of that, 330 million people were affected. There was a huge heat wave, and temperatures actually soared higher than 40 degrees Celsius for days. And there was a lot of, problem because the water availability in 91 of India's reservoirs were at its lowest levels. And so there wasn't much of storage capacity. And so, people were thirsty. And the aquifers, or the water that is pulled out from under the, from wells, for example, there was a shortage in that as well. So this region in general is facing water shortages. And when there is climate change and when there is extreme heat, then you really start seeing, the effects of it. And when this did happen in 2016, there was a crisis in India. And so it's really unfortunate that right now, instead of working together to solve these problems and working as neighbors to help each other out in difficult times, water is actually being used, as a potential weapon against each other. Now, as the video mentioned, there is an Indus Water Treaty, and according to the Indus Water Treaty, there were 6 different water sort of sources, and it was decided, around partition, that 3 of the eastern rivers, Bias, Ravi, and Sutlej, would be given to India, and Indus, Chenab, and Jhelum would be given to Pakistan. And so that did happen. As the video said, things kind of continued to be handled okay as far as the water goes. But, there have been issues, and those issues actually had to be moved to World Bank to resolve. As you can see on the left-hand side, these are actually, real sort of news clips that I saw in the newspapers over the last several years. And here you see that, Modi wants to just kind of annul the Indus Water Treaty. And, you also, as mentioned in the video, there are hydropower plants being built in India because, the main problem, as was mentioned in the video, is that the source of all of these 6, Bias, Ravi, Sutlej, Indus, Chenab, Jhelum, all of the sources, they come through the Himalayas, through India. And so when there are a lot of hydro power plants that are going to be built around, let's say, Chenab, Indus, and Jhelum, well, the amount of water that's going to be coming into Pakistan is going to be very, very low. And since we know in the future that the water requirements are going to be going up with an increase in population and climate change, this is a very controversial topic, and one of it is also a national security risk. So if we look at, how water is being weaponized, it's not only just in Pakistan and India, but water has been being used as a weapon in many different ways. It has, this slide really kind of discusses about, 6 different ways that water is being used as a weapon of war. You do see, for example, if there are big demonstrations, water is kind of used to sort of throw people back. So water is used to really control populations, destroy areas. It can be used as a tactical weapon to destroy, disable military targets. It can be used as coercive weapons to fund territorial administration or acquire weapons, and so on and so forth. But, if you really look at it, it can also, what is very dangerous is that it can be used as an instrument of psychological terrorism. And we're here, by this, basically threaten to withhold or contaminate water supply to create fear amongst non-combatants or civilians. So, if you threaten that you'll hold back the water or, contaminate it, that can be very, very scary for people. Also, it can be used as an instrument to extort of extortion or incentivization. So again, to reward or punish population. So these are sort of, very dark and dreary ways that water is being used as a weapon, which is very unfortunate. As mentioned in one of the earlier videos that I showed you in this lecture, just about 1% of the water of the world. I mean, if you look at the globe, you see so much water, but actually just 1% of that is, drinkable water. And of that, we are seeing that, so much of water is being contaminated. And so, this is a very big issue. So the big questions are, it's a rather dreary sort of a picture that I have painted in today's lecture. But the question that I have, and I would like to pose, and I will share some of, the answer in just a little bit is, what are the solutions to solve this problem? Well, first off, immediately we discussed, the farming, improving better farming processes and procedures, and training farmers. So that's the first thing that can be done, and that will save a lot of the wastage. But what else can be done, and what are other countries thinking of doing? What are industrialized countries thinking of doing? Because the climate change is here to stay. The water scarcity is here to stay. And there is a lot of talk about a food crisis in the future because of climate change and the water crisis. So with all of these looming crises, what are other countries, what are industrialized first world countries doing to solve this problem? Let's have a look. Well, one of the things that, countries are doing is they are beginning to invest in vertical farming, and a lot of venture capitalists in industrialized countries are investing in this in a big way. So what you see on the right-hand side is, these big buildings, and within those buildings there are, there are farms, and these are kind of like greenhouses. So, greenhouses are also built in sort of glass, right? And within those greenhouses, temperature is maintained according to the plant's requirements. And so these are just, you can just imagine as, huge greenhouses, but they're usually vertical. They are usually made upwards. And the reason is, there's not going to be a lot of room and space. You don't want to, especially these are built many times in the middle of cities. So they are not, you don't have a lot of space. It's very, very expensive in cities. Just real shortly, I will be showing you a couple of, I'll just show you one video, I think, on vertical farms, just to give you an idea. It's going to be a tour of what a vertical farm looks like from inside. But the benefits of a vertical farm is, number one, you will have reliable harvest. So these farms are run 24 hours. LED lights are usually put within these vertical farms so that day and night, the plants have enough lighting to grow. And there are very little water requirements, just about 10% of what is usually used to grow these crops. You don't need as much of washing and pesticides, and there's a lot less transportation costs because a lot of these vertical farms are built within cities. So it's very easy to go and transport, the crops to stores. So you can basically have a lot more maximum crop yield in a small space, and you can control the temperature, humidity, daylight hours, and basically you can use all kinds of technology, artificial intelligence to really maximize and optimize the amount of yield that is being grown. All right, and so that you can also grow a wide variety of crops. So by using technology, you can also create optimal air quality for the plants to grow in, optimum minerals, nutrient qualities, water quality, and optimum light quality. So you can really just create this environment that's just perfect for growing the crops. And yeah, so that's just a little bit about vertical farming. And I'm now going to show you a quick video on vertical farming, and I hope you enjoy it. So just 1 second.
In our Real Food series this morning, we're taking a look at the growing trend of vertical farming. The world's population will climb around 7 billion people to nearly 10 billion by 2050. That will make it even more challenging to feed everybody on the planet. Companies like AeroFarms are rethinking how we grow the vegetables by going up to provide fresh and affordable produce. Michelle Miller is at an AeroFarms indoor growing facility in Newark, New Jersey, with the technology behind vertical farming. That's what it's called. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning. Well, this is what vertical farming looks like. Arugula, kale, watercress, all growing indoors on shelves stacked 7 levels high. When it's all said and done, AeroFarms says it can produce 1.7 million pounds of greens every year. This is to scale.
This is what we mean by scale.
This 70,000 square foot facility housed in a former Newark steel plant.
This is 36 feet high.
Is CEO David Rosenberg's green machine. It produces 130 times more produce than the average field farm of the same size in America per year. But to fully understand this large-scale operation, you've got to go back to its roots, where it all began 7 years ago inside Phillips Academy Charter School.
Let me finish it off.
AeroFarms' prototype was planted in the school's cafeteria as a teaching tool for students to learn the basics of biology, chemistry, and nutrition. Essentially, these kids grow the greens for their school salad bar.
I think growing food every day and seeing it, I understand and have a better taste for it and a better understanding for it.
You appreciate it more.
I appreciate it a lot more.
The technology is called aeroponics, which grows the plants on this reusable fabric. Proprietary information.
Those are called trade secrets.
Yes, I know.
But as Savannah Love explained it to us, this process needs no soil, no sunlight, and uses less water than conventional farming.
We're misting it from underneath, so the water comes up through the sheet and it hits like the seedlings.
Hits them with a nutrient-rich solution that allows the plant to take root. These LED lights substitute for the sun.
This was probably seeded about 3 days ago.
Rosenberg says vertical farming offers higher yields with less land, less time, and no pesticides. They can farm indoors in any city, anywhere around the world.
From seed to harvest in 16 days, what otherwise takes 30 days in the field. And then we're able to do that 22 times a year versus in the field 3 times a year because of seasonality.
Still, not everyone is sold.
Early adopting is not necessarily bad.
Cornell University researcher Cale Harbick says his studies found indoor farms that rely solely on artificial light are not energy efficient or sustainable.
Just because it's possible to grow inside a warehouse doesn't mean it's a good idea, doesn't mean it's cost effective. If you do the math, the energy costs just aren't what they should be.
Harbick warns these companies struggle once their seed money runs dry. Case in point, one Chicago-based company recently shut down its growing operations.
These are our growing towers.
Rosenberg says AeroFarms LEDs that run 24/7 have been tweaked to save energy. He didn't share just how much. Investors believe in it. AeroFarms has raised over $50 million from the likes of Goldman Sachs and Prudential and received more than $9 million in state and local grants.
Why would someone want to buy from you as opposed to a field farmer or a greenhouse farmer?
Here, we're growing in the local community. That's the supply chain difference. But it turns out that we're able to compete on taste and texture.
By adjusting those lights and nutrients, Rosenberg says they can also make their arugula more peppery, their kale a little sweeter, which for many of us, parents in particular, might be the biggest selling point of all.
Very flavorful.
Yes, it is.
Goodness. And you guys like your greens? You really eat them?
Yes.
They really do. And AeroFarms has also made a commitment to this community. About 45% of its employees are from the Newark area. They even sell these trays for about $3.99 in local supermarkets here, Margaret.
What do you think, Margaret? I'll try it.
Yeah, I would too.
I'm vegetarian. Sign me up. I get excited about
I'm
those
thinking
kind of
peppery arugula. There's not a bad thing wrong with that. Nothing. I see the other side, what they're saying, but when you look at all the pros and the cons, the pros seem to outweigh the cons to me on that story.
Worth a try. Michelle,
very
thank
nice.
you. Cool story there.
So I hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope it gave you a great overview. The big question is, why isn't everybody just doing vertical farming? Why isn't it just picking up all around the world? And the reason is it has high startup costs. So obviously you can imagine making a huge infrastructure that requires a lot of time and commitment, and above all, resources. Another big thing is that these vertical farms are very good for leafy plants, but not for bulkier plants such as tomatoes, corn, and potatoes. So there are some restrictions on the types of produce that is being made in these vertical farms. Finally, there is a high energy infrastructure cost. So it requires electricity pretty much 24 hours a day. And there are some energy recycling solutions that are being used. It was mentioned in the video, for example, that LED lighting is being used, which doesn't have as much energy requirement, but still net, the energy costs of something like this are, it is expensive, especially since you probably need to have some sort of humidity control, temperature control, water control, all of these things. So that is what is basically holding people back from vertical farming. But with a lot of investment in this and new technology being introduced, this does seem to be a potentially good solution for the future. These are just some pictures that I put together for you to sort of see. These are all in your lecture, so you can look at these in great detail. They really talk a little bit more about how these vertical farms are set up, what is the basic technology behind it, how is everything functioning. So if you want to learn more about it, feel free to sort of read these in more detail. And there's a lot of information out there on the internet as well on vertical farms. Another very interesting solution to this water crisis is in-store farming. So basically, little small farms are being made within grocery stores. And so I think in order to explain this, I'm going to show you a quick video, and that will give you a good idea of what in-store farming is all about.
Grocery micro-farms take off. In our annual trend report 3 years ago, we correctly predicted that the time has come for supermarkets to install their own indoor farms, where shoppers could pick their own produce right from the farm. The ultimate in freshness, taste, and local. Kroger is leading the way by adding these mini farms to 2 of their QFC stores in the state of Washington. Kroger has teamed up with Inform, the 6-year-old startup based in Germany, to install modular vertical farms. In these mini farms, which use a hydroponic farming method, 9 varieties of lettuces and herbs are stacked in rows and grown in nutrient-rich water until they're mature enough to be sold to customers. Inform has more than 500 such installations in stores and distribution centers in other parts of the world, but this is the first installations in U.S. grocery stores. The growing process at the 2 pilot stores involve LEDs and an irrigation system with recycled water. Inform uses a cloud-based technology system to remotely control the temperature and lighting for each of its farms. Customers today want transparency. They want to know exactly where their product is from, the province where it was grown, according to Susie Montfort, Kroger's Group Vice President of Fresh Foods. The program has already been deemed a success by Kroger. Montfort said that the stores have been selling everything from kale to cilantro as fast as the plants have been able to mature. Kroger has announced plans to expand vertical farming to 13 more QFCs in Washington and Oregon by April 2020. Inform's the ultimate goal is to make local food production mainstream. For the bulk of the last century, food has been produced far from where it's consumed, generating a supply chain that's environmentally unsustainable, said Osnat Michaeli, the company's co-founder and chief brand officer. Our modular farms offer the potential of turning the supply chain on its head by building the world's first global farming network.
So for a lot of you, these concepts must be a little bit surprising and shocking, but I also wanted to share what, these pictures with you about what future cities are going to be looking like. And here you can see, large vertical structures, and there's a lot of greenery within those vertical structures because, this is something that is going to be needed in the future. So these have been made by architects. I believe one of them is for France, and then another one for another industrialized country. But these are, this is what first world countries are working towards. So you will be seeing a lot of vertical structures in the future and a lot more greenery. And also, if you look a little bit deeper inside over here, you'll be seeing a lot more vertical farms. So you can see right over here, these are two structures with vertical farms. And also, these also seem like vertical farms as well. So, these are just some things for you to keep in mind. These are not just futuristic ideas, but these are actually things that are happening in the world and that countries are planning for, because these methods will help them fight against the water crisis, the food crisis, and climate change. So there are three different benefits from using these kinds of solutions. Finally, there is the big solution of using desalination plants. What desalination plants are basically, these are large plants that convert seawater to drinking water. This is, great. It's a huge investment. It's a very high cost investment. You can see from the picture on the upper right-hand side, looks like, there's a lot going on in this structure. And so lots of machinery, big cost to set up. And also there are chemicals and waste produced that can damage the environment. Also, desalination plants are very large, so they require a lot of space. However, the water that does come out from a desalination plant is fresh, it's clean, it's safe, and it provides water in a situation where water is scarce and drinking water is not available. So this is definitely one big solution. In Karachi, Pakistan, just to tell you, there was a desalination plant that was made actually in DHA for 600 million. It was in phase 8. It was set up on 10 acres with the capacity of 14 million liters of drinking water, and it would also generate 94 megawatts of electricity. It was expected that the water that was generated would help 800,000 people. However, unfortunately, even though the desalination plant was set up, all of a sudden it stopped working. And the reason was that there was some sort of a light fluctuation. And after that, some of the machinery was not operational. And Siemens, because they were using a lot of refurbished machinery, kind of said that they would not come in to just repair it for free. So therefore, this huge, $600 million plant is just standing idle, which is such a shame. So again, these are just, I hope you enjoyed this case study. And with that, I'm coming to an end of this lecture. And I hope you learned a lot about different wastages. And, since you are in a class of Lean Six Sigma, it's important to really identify wastages all across the world. And also to start thinking a lot about what are the solutions to solve the wastages, to eliminate the wastages. How can you think in a lean way? And you all are the future of the world. And so it's important that you are aware of, the problems that the world is going to be facing, and that you also start, thinking about solutions on how to solve them. With that, I come to an end to this lecture. Thank you very much. I hope all of you are doing very well. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.